The alien colony lay broken under a sky that no longer felt like home. Smoke still drifted from the ruins of their defense towers, rising in thin grey lines that stretched into the void like the final cries of a dying world. Streets once filled with trade and laughter were now silent, littered with shattered metal, burnt-out vehicles, and the bodies of those who had believed the Council's promise that protection would always come. Now there was only ruin, only silence, only the taste of despair in the dry air. The colony had been attacked 3 weeks earlier, a sudden and brutal assault from an enemy fleet that had swept through their system like a storm. No warning had come, no Council fleet had arrived to defend them. Their orbital stations had burned in the first hour, their planetary defense grid overwhelmed before it could fire more than a few scattered shots. By the second day, the enemy had stripped their supply depots, destroyed their energy cores, and left them stranded with little more than scraps. And then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the enemy ships were gone, leaving only destruction in their wake. No explanation, no declaration, no demands. Just fire and silence. At first, the survivors clung to hope. They gathered in the remnants of their central hall, broadcasting distress signals into the void on every frequency they could reach. The Council was vast, the Council was powerful. Surely someone would hear, someone would come. They had allies, treaties, old promises of protection written into the very foundation of their government. But days passed. Then weeks. The signals went unanswered. Every night the survivors climbed to the rooftops and stared at the stars, waiting for the glimmer of engines cutting across the black, but the sky remained empty. The only sound was the wind whispering through hollow ruins and the faint, desperate hum of their failing transmitters. Food supplies dwindled quickly. The colony's storage had been hit in the raids, leaving little more than emergency rations. Families huddled together in the ruins of their homes, whispering to children that help was on the way even as their voices trembled. The old and the sick grew weaker by the day. The wounded filled what was left of the medical halls, groaning in the shadows, their bandages stained with dark blood, their eyes begging for medicines that no longer existed. The fear grew heavier with every sunrise. Some whispered that the Council had abandoned them, that their species was no longer worth saving. Others muttered that the enemy would return, that the destruction of their defenses had only been the beginning, and the next attack would finish them completely. The leaders tried to keep order, but their voices were hollow, their eyes carrying the same despair as everyone else. At night, around the few fires they dared to light, the survivors told each other the same story, that rescue was coming. That a Council fleet was on its way. That the signals had been heard. But deep down, even the strongest among them began to doubt. On the 12th day, one of the colony's remaining scanners picked up something faint at the edge of the system. A ripple of energy, distant but steady, moving closer. The technicians rushed to the hall, their voices trembling as they reported the readings. The survivors gathered, hope rising in their weary hearts. Children smiled for the first time in days, believing that perhaps, at last, the Council had heard their cries. But the data was strange. The object was moving fast, too fast for most Council vessels, its energy signature distorted, unlike any design they knew. The leaders argued through the night. Some said it was rescue, some said it was the enemy returning, others whispered that it might be something worse, something old, something from beyond the maps of their charts. Fear and hope clashed in the hearts of the survivors as they watched the signal creep closer day by day. By the 20th day, the colony was on the edge of collapse. Fights broke out over food, soldiers abandoned their posts, and the wounded began to die in silence. The leaders could no longer hide the truth. If rescue did not arrive soon, the colony would not survive another week. And still the sky remained empty. Still no Council fleet came. Still no answer to their desperate cries. On the 21st day, a new sound shook the halls. It was not the hum of their failing transmitters or the whisper of wind through ruins. It was a low, deep vibration that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath them, rattling walls, shaking broken windows, and filling the air with an alien rhythm that none of their machines could explain. The technicians screamed as their scanners lit up with new readings. Something massive had entered the edge of the system, something burning with power that made their machines stutter and flicker. At first, they thought it was the enemy fleet returning, come to finish their slaughter. Panic spread, families running into the streets, voices rising in terror. But the energy signature was different, unlike anything the colony had seen before. It was old and strange, scarred yet powerful, as though the void itself had shaped it. The signal grew stronger, closer, louder with each passing hour, until even those without scanners could feel it in their bones. Children cried in their sleep, elders clutched their chests, and soldiers stood frozen at their posts, their weapons trembling in their hands. The leaders gathered again, their voices cracking as they debated. Was this the rescue they had prayed for, or was it something far worse? The transmissions they sent brought no answer. The object drew closer in silence, unbroken by signal or warning. Only its power spoke, a presence that pressed down on the colony like a storm waiting to break. By the 23rd day, the survivors could see it with their own eyes. A shadow on the horizon of the stars, a massive shape cutting across the void, its silhouette jagged, brutal, and unfamiliar. It did not move like a council vessel, sleek and precise. It moved like a predator, slow and steady, every motion deliberate. And then, for the first time in weeks, the transmissions changed. The colony's failing radios burst with sound, not words, not signals, but a howl. A long, terrible howl that echoed across every channel, filling the air with a sound that was both alive and mechanical, both ancient and new. The survivors clutched their ears, their eyes wide with terror and awe. The howl was not a cry for help. It was not a greeting. It was a declaration. Something was coming. Something that had heard their cries, but not as allies. Something that carried fire in its heart and steel in its bones. And as the shadow grew larger, blocking out the stars, every alien in the colony felt the same thought burn in their minds, though none dared to speak it aloud. Humanity. The colony's nights had grown heavier, each darker than the one before. Fires burned low in the ruins, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl over broken walls and shattered streets. Families huddled together, staring up at the empty heavens, whispering stories of rescue fleets that never came. Every passing hour cut deeper into their hope, every silence on the comms gnawed at their hearts. The sky, once a canvas of comfort, had become a reminder of abandonment. Soldiers who once marched proudly through the streets now stood on rooftops, their rifles hanging loose in tired hands, eyes fixed on the void with haunted expressions. They had sent hundreds of transmissions, pleas for help carried on every frequency, but not one had been answered. Some said the signals were never reaching, others said the council was ignoring them deliberately. In hushed corners, the word betrayal was whispered more and more often, and the bitterness in those whispers grew sharper with each passing day. Elders who had once spoken of the council's greatness now spat curses, saying their treaties and promises were nothing but lies. The young, who had believed themselves under the protection of a galactic alliance, now felt the weight of being truly alone. Yet still, the colony's leaders tried to hold the people together. They gathered in the cracked central hall, standing under a broken dome where the stars shone through. Their voices carried more weariness than strength, but they insisted that rescue was coming. They reminded everyone that the council had never abandoned a colony before, that perhaps the delay was caused by distance or the need to assemble stronger fleets. But their eyes betrayed their doubt, and the silence between their speeches stretched longer every night. On the 24th day, the scanners pulsed again, detecting the same object at the edge of the system. It was closer now, far larger than anything their technology could properly measure. The technicians leaned over broken consoles, their trembling hands working controls that sparked with failing power. The readings flickered wildly, sometimes showing one vessel, sometimes many, sometimes none at all. It was as if the very void was bending around the object, twisting their machines into confusion. Fear spread quickly among the survivors. Mothers pulled their children tighter, soldiers whispered to one another about curses and omens. Some said it was the enemy fleet returning, others claimed it was something older, something worse than the enemy. One elder, his eyes pale with age, muttered that the void itself was alive, and it had come to swallow them. That night, the colony's streets echoed with arguments. Some survivors demanded that they continue sending signals, begging harder, offering trade, servitude, anything to make the council respond. Others spat back, saying the council was never going to come, that they had been sacrificed to buy time for richer worlds. Despair turned to rage, and rage turned to fear, until the people's unity broke apart. Fistfights erupted in the shadows, guards struggled to keep order, and the leaders were forced to admit the truth that no one wanted to hear. They had no idea who or what was approaching. By the 25th day, the object was visible even to the naked eye. A faint shape moved across the stars, at first no more than a speck of shadow, but with every night it grew larger, sharper, undeniable. Survivors climbed to the highest ruins and stared, their voices breaking as they argued over what it was. Some swore it was a council warship, its engines burning in silence. Others shouted that its design was wrong, too jagged, too brutal, not like the sleek curves of council vessels. But whatever it was coming straight toward them, slow, steady, unrelenting. The silence of the sky became unbearable. No messages arrived, no answers to their calls. The only sound that carried across their radios was the faint hum, low and steady, echoing from the approaching shadow. It wasn't communication, it was a presence, a warning carried on a voice too old and heavy to understand. The children cried when they heard it, the elders shivered, and even the strongest soldiers clenched their jaws in fear. The colony's leaders gathered again, but this time their speeches carried no hope. Their words were hollow, their promises empty. The people no longer believed in the council's rescue, no longer believed in salvation. All that remained was the shadow in the sky and the howl that grew louder every hour. On the 26th day, the truth began to sink into every mind. Rescue was not coming. The council had left them to die. And whatever was arriving from the void was not friend, not savior, not ally. The silence of the stars had been broken, but not by the voices they prayed for. Something else was coming, and with every heartbeat, it drew closer. The 27th day began like the others, with weary survivors rising from cold floors and broken shelters, their eyes sunken and their voices hoarse from hunger. The sky remained dark, the stars watching like silent witnesses to their suffering. But this morning, something was different. The air itself seemed heavier, as if a storm was gathering above their world, though no clouds moved in their atmosphere. Soldiers patrolling the ruined streets paused, their ears twitching, their eyes narrowing at a sound too faint to name. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the wind had no weight, no rhythm. This sound did. It was low, deep, distant, like thunder rolling not from the sky but from the void itself. The noise echoed through the comm towers, rattling static across every channel. Technicians rushed to their consoles, their tired hands shaking as they tried to adjust frequencies, but no matter what they did, the sound remained. It was not a message, not words. They could feel it more than they could hear it, a vibration in their bones, a pulse that shook the metal ruins around them. Some whispered it was the enemy returning, others said it was the void itself roaring, but no one could deny the truth. Something massive was coming closer. Panic spread quickly. Families abandoned their shelters, crowding into the central square, their voices rising in terror. Mothers held their children tight, trying to cover their ears, but the sound cut through flesh and bone alike. It was not deafening, but it carried power, a presence that grew with every passing hour. Elders muttered prayers to long-forgotten gods, soldiers gripped their rifles tighter though they knew they could not stand against what was approaching. The leaders stood on the cracked steps of the central hall, their voices trembling as they tried to calm the masses, but the faint thunder drowned their words, reminding everyone that no speech could erase the shadow closing in on their world. That night, the sound grew louder. The survivors climbed onto rooftops and stared at the sky, their faces pale in the dim light of their fires. The object was clearer now, no longer just a speck but a distinct silhouette. It glided across the void with unnatural smoothness, its outline jagged and brutal, unlike any ship they had seen before. Its engines burned faintly. But the sound that filled the colony did not match the sight. It was not the clean hum of council drives, nor the sharp crack of enemy thrusters. It was something older, something raw, like a beast growling from the edge of the stars. The children wept at the sound, begging their parents to make it stop. Soldiers snapped at each other in fear, accusing their leaders of lying, of hiding the truth of what was coming. And through it all, the noise grew heavier, closer, more alive. On the scanners, the technicians reported readings that made no sense. The object's size shifted every time they measured it, sometimes small enough to be a single vessel, sometimes vast enough to blot out the horizon. The energy signature pulsed like a heartbeat, sending waves of distortion that scrambled their instruments. One young technician whispered what everyone else feared. "It isn't a ship. It's something else." But the elders, the ones old enough to remember stories their parents had whispered in secret, knew better. Their eyes widened in recognition, and their voices broke with terror as they spoke the word no one else wanted to hear. Human. The younger survivors laughed at the idea, their voices sharp with disbelief. Humans were myths, death-welders erased from the galaxy centuries ago, destroyed by the Council in wars that left nothing but ashes. But the elders shook their heads, their trembling hands pointing at the sky. "No myth howls like that," one muttered. The sound rose again, louder than before, a single drawn-out echo that seemed to split the night in two. The survivors dropped to their knees, covering their ears, their eyes wide with fear. It was not a signal of peace. It was not a call for help. It was the cry of a predator entering its hunting ground. And as the howl faded, leaving the colony in silence once more, everyone knew the truth they had tried so hard to deny. Rescue was not coming. The Council had abandoned them. And what was approaching from the void was not salvation. It was something far older, far more dangerous. Something the galaxy had thought destroyed. Humanity's shadow had returned. The 28th day began under a sky that no longer felt like a sky but like a veil hiding something vast and waiting. Survivors gathered on rooftops, on broken walls, in the ruins of towers, all with their eyes fixed upward, straining to see what had haunted them in sound for nights. The faint echo that had rattled their bones was now joined by a growing light, a glow far away in the void but creeping closer with every hour. At first it looked like a star, then like a cluster, then something more, a shape moving steadily against the black canvas of space. The colony's scanners flickered and hissed with interference, their readings inconsistent, but no one needed machines now. They could see it with their own eyes. The object was massive, jagged at the edges, its silhouette stretching unnaturally across the starlight. It was not sleek like the ships of the Council, those polished vessels made to impress diplomats and inspire trust. It was not smooth and sharp like the enemy's fleets, which struck with cold precision. This thing was something else entirely, a design born not of beauty or arrogance but of necessity and war. Its hull was scarred, patched with layers of steel and alloy, some pieces shining with strange metals the aliens could not name, others scorched black from ancient battles. Its body was brutal, angled, designed to endure, to kill, to survive. And worst of all, it was alive. Not in the way of breathing creatures, but in the way its engines burned, how the hum of its systems rolled through the void like the growl of a predator preparing to strike. The colony fell into silence, every voice drowned by the sight of the silhouette crawling across the stars. Children clutched their mothers, soldiers gripped their rifles with sweaty hands, and elders wept openly, their memories dragging old nightmares back into the light. Some whispered, "Council," but their own words sounded hollow, false. Others muttered, "The enemy," but none of the enemy's ships looked like this. Then one of the oldest survivors, his body frail and broken, spoke the word none had dared to say aloud since the sound first began. "Human." The crowd recoiled at the name, some hissing in denial, others staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. Humans were myths, erased from history, exterminated by the united power of the Council generations ago. But the ship above them, the howl that had shaken their bones, the scars on its hull, none of it belonged to myths. Myths do not return in steel and fire. The shape grew larger, clearer, filling more and more of the horizon until it seemed to block the stars themselves. Engines flared, glowing red like the eyes of some beast tearing its way out of the void. The sound rose again, not just through radios but through the very air of the colony, a howl that cut into the hearts of every living being. It was not a message, not a code. It was a declaration. A war cry. Soldiers dropped to their knees, some covering their ears, others whispering prayers that had not been spoken in centuries. The colony's leaders stood on the broken steps of the central hall, staring upward with faces drained of color. They had told their people rescue was coming, but now they realized their mistake. This was not rescue. This was something older, something far more dangerous. The shape was human, unmistakably so. Every ancient story, every forbidden archive described ships like this, brutal and scarred, carrying deathwelders who fought with a fury unmatched by any other species. The leaders knew what this meant. The Council had lied. Humanity had never been destroyed. They had survived, hidden in the void, waiting for the day they would return. And now they had. The warship hovered at the edge of their skies, massive and merciless, its engines howling like a beast in the night. No transmissions came, no signals of peace, no offers of alliance. Only silence and the crushing presence of something the galaxy had thought gone forever. The shape in the darkness was no savior, no ally. It was a reminder. A warning. Humanity was back. The 29th day began with silence, but it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a world holding its breath. The warship hovered above the colony's skies, vast and merciless, its scarred hull glowing faintly with power. No signals came, no transmissions, no demands. Only its shadow stretched across the ruins below, pressing down on the survivors like the weight of a mountain. The aliens watched in terror, waiting for something, anything to explain why this monstrous vessel had come. Some clung to the faint hope that it was rescue, that perhaps the Council had built new ships in secret, but deep in their hearts they knew better. This design was not Council, nor enemy. This design was human. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars lit the sky, the warship stirred. Its engines burned brighter, red like molten eyes, and a low vibration shook the ground. The survivors covered their ears, but it did nothing. The sound was not heard, it was felt, crawling inside their bones, rattling their chests, shaking the very ruins around them. Then it came. The warship unleashed a howl. It was not the clean, sharp sound of machines. It was something alive, primal, a roar carried across every frequency and through the air itself. It thundered into the night, a scream that echoed across mountains and oceans, a sound so powerful it cracked glass and made entire buildings tremble. Children screamed in terror, soldiers dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, elders wept openly as the howl cut through their hearts. It was not random noise. It was a voice. The colony's translators tried to decode it, but the systems faltered, breaking under the weight of something they could not process. Static filled their screens, words twisted, meanings lost, but the tone carried everything. It was not a call for help. It was not an introduction. It was a war cry. Every survivor felt it, every soul understood it without needing words. The warship was not here as a savior. It was here as a predator announcing its return. The howl repeated, longer, louder, filling the entire system, bouncing off satellites, echoing across the broken remains of orbital stations. The sound spread far beyond the colony, carried by comms, relays, and listening posts hidden in the dark. Across nearby sectors, distant ships picked it up and froze in horror. Fleets scrambled to identify the source, but deep down, even before the reports came, their captains already knew. It was humanity. On the ground, the survivors collapsed under the weight of the sound. Some clawed at their ears, begging it to stop, others whispered prayers as if gods could shield them. The leaders stood in the central square, pale and trembling, their mouths dry. They had promised their people rescue, but what had come was something the galaxy had buried in its history, something no one wanted to believe would ever rise again. The howl was a message carved into the bones of every living being. Humanity had returned. Soldiers who had once stood proudly to defend their colony were now shadows of themselves, trembling in their armor, eyes darting upward in fear. None dared to fire a single shot, none dared to speak. The warship's presence was absolute, its cry so vast it drowned every other thought. When the howl finally faded, the silence that followed was even worse. No words came after it, no explanation, no demands. Only silence, heavy and suffocating, broken by the sound of the colony's own fear. For a moment, the world itself seemed to stop, as if the very air was waiting for the warship's next move. Then the howl came again, shorter this time but sharper, like the growl of a predator preparing to strike. And in that moment, the survivors understood the truth. The galaxy had not destroyed humanity. It had only given them time. Time to survive, time to grow, time to wait in the void until the moment was right. And now, the moment had come. The war cry of Earth had echoed once more across the stars. And the galaxy would never sleep in silence again. The howl of the warship still echoed in the minds of the survivors long after the sound had faded. It had cut into them like a blade, shaking not only their ears but their very souls. The children huddled in silence, too afraid to cry, their eyes wide and unblinking. Soldiers who had once sworn to protect the colony sat trembling against the walls of ruined buildings, their weapons forgotten at their sides. And the elders, those who had lived long enough to remember whispers their ancestors once spoke, wept openly, because they knew what the others were only beginning to realize. This was not just a ship. This was not just noise. This was humanity's return. The leaders gathered in the shattered hall once more, their voices thin and hollow, their faces pale with fear. Some still tried to cling to hope, insisting that perhaps the humans had come as allies, that maybe they had changed, that maybe the warship was here to offer help. But the elders shook their heads slowly, their eyes clouded with terror. One of them, his voice breaking, told a story the younger ones had never heard. Long ago, he said, before the council was whole, there was war. Not against one empire, not against one species, but against humans. They were not many, not compared to the rest of us. But they were fierce, more fierce than any world born under gentle suns. Their planet was death itself, a place that forged warriors out of every child, where storms and beasts and hunger made survival a battle every day. And when they came into the stars, they carried that fire with them. No fleet could match their fury, no army could break their will. They fought not like soldiers but like predators, every battle a hunt, every defeat a lesson that only made them stronger. The hall fell silent as he spoke, the younger ones listening with growing dread. Another elder added, her voice trembling. The council united not for peace, but for fear of them. Every empire, every species, every fleet came together to destroy humanity. We burned their colonies, shattered their fleets, hunted their worlds. We erased their name from our books, their memory from our children. We told ourselves they were gone. But the truth was always there. The truth was that no fire, no blade, no storm could erase a species like that. We knew it. We feared it. And we buried it under lies. The younger leaders shook their heads, refusing to believe, but the evidence was above them, howling in the sky. The warship was real, alive, its presence undeniable. The fear of memory spread through the colony like a sickness. Soldiers began whispering to each other that their weapons would not matter, that nothing they had could stop what was coming. Families huddled tighter, whispering prayers in voices that shook with despair. Children asked who the humans were, and the answers they received only made them cry harder. Beyond the colony, across the galaxy, the howl had already spread. Listening posts picked it up, relays carried it, traders whispered it in fear as they docked in faraway ports. In the council chamber, the word human was spoken aloud for the first time in centuries, and it carried more weight than any law, any title, any threat. Delegates who had once mocked the idea of humans being anything but myths now sat frozen, their eyes wide with dread. Some demanded fleets be sent immediately to contain the threat, others whispered of sealing entire sectors, but none could hide the trembling in their voices. They all knew what the howl meant. It meant humanity had survived. The sound of fear returned to the galaxy, not as rumor, not as story, but as reality. In the colony, the night stretched longer than ever. The warship above did not move closer, it did not fire. It did not speak again. It only lingered, its shadow covering the ruins, its presence suffocating the survivors. That silence was worse than its howl. It was the silence of a predator watching prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The elders whispered to each other in the darkness. This is not rescue. This is not peace. This is memory come alive. This is vengeance. And though the younger ones tried to deny it, in their hearts, they knew the truth. The galaxy had buried the nightmare of humanity long ago, but nightmares never die. They only wait in the dark, and now, awakened by the cries of the desperate, humanity had returned to remind them of what they had tried so hard to forget. The 30th day came heavy with dread, the colony wrapped in silence broken only by the faint hum that seemed to come from the warship above. The survivors barely spoke, their eyes fixed on the sky as if every blink might make the massive shadow disappear. But it did not vanish. It lingered, waiting, its engines glowing faintly like burning embers in the dark. The leaders tried to keep the people calm, whispering that perhaps the ship was only watching, perhaps it would leave, perhaps this was some ghost of the past and nothing more. But the elders shook their heads, knowing better. Predators do not watch forever. Predators strike. And when the strike came, it was unlike anything the colony had seen. The warship stirred, its hull creaking like a beast stretching after a long sleep. Then its weapons came alive. Turrets unfolded from scarred plating, cannons slid out from hidden compartments, and the sky lit up with a crimson glow. Without warning, the first blast roared across the heavens. A beam of searing light tore through the void, striking not the colony but the blockade the enemy had left at the system's edge. Forgotten drones, sentinels, and scavenger ships that had lingered there exploded in fire, ripped apart before they could even respond. The sound of their destruction echoed across the survivors' comms, and every alien in the colony stared upward in awe and horror. The warship did not miss, it did not hesitate. Each shot was precise, merciless, cutting through fleets like a blade through paper. In the council chambers light years away, the signals arrived, and the delegates froze as they watched the feeds. The warship's firepower was beyond anything in their records. This was not technology they could measure, nor tactics they could predict. This was chaos wrapped in steel, fury sharpened into discipline. This was humanity's strike. On the ground, the soldiers of the colony fell to their knees, their rifles clattering to the stone as they realized the truth. They could not fight something like this. They could only watch. Families clutched their children tighter, their fear turning into something else, something close to reverence. The warship fought not like a machine but like a living thing, every movement purposeful, every blast carrying rage that had been buried for centuries. One by one, the enemy ships disintegrated, their wreckage falling silent into the void. The warship roared again, not with sound this time but with fire, its engines howling as it pushed forward, cutting deeper into the system as if daring any who still lived to challenge it. None did. In minutes, the sky was clear, the blockade gone, the system silent once more. The survivors stared upward, their hearts pounding. Some whispered in fear, others in awe. But all understood the same thing: the howl had not been an empty warning. It had been a promise. And this was its fulfillment. The first strike of humanity had come, and it was devastating. Across the galaxy, in outposts and hidden worlds, rumors spread faster than light. Traders told stories of a human warship that tore fleets apart with fire in its guns and vengeance in its engines. Soldiers muttered that no fleet could stand against such fury. Leaders in the council argued in panic, some calling for extermination, others whispering that it was already too late. The galaxy shook with fear, but in the colony below, the fear was sharper. They knew now that the humans had not come to save them. They had come to show the galaxy what had been forgotten. And as the warship drifted above them, silent once more, every survivor felt the same weight in their bones. This was only the beginning. The sky above the colony was no longer the same after the strike. Where once the stars had shone quietly, now only burning wreckage drifted, the shattered remains of the enemy blockade scattered like ashes across the void. The survivors stood frozen in the streets, their eyes fixed upward, their mouths open in disbelief. They had prayed for rescue and feared annihilation, but what they had witnessed was something neither prayer nor fear could have prepared them for. The human warship hovered silently above, its weapons cooling, its engines glowing faintly, as if it had unleashed only a fraction of its fury. No message followed, no broadcast, no demand. Only silence, heavy and suffocating, pressed down upon the ruined colony like the weight of an ocean. Soldiers gripped their rifles but did not raise them. Families clutched each other, whispering to calm their children, but even the softest words felt useless against the presence of the warship. The elders bowed their heads, tears running down their faces, for they understood what this silence meant. Humans did not need to explain themselves. Their actions were their words, and those words had been written in fire. Across the galaxy, the silence spread like a wound. Council chambers replayed the recordings again and again, their delegates sitting pale and stiff as the images of the strike filled the room. Generals argued loudly, demanding fleets be gathered, but none could hide the fear trembling in their voices. The silence after the human attack was worse than the attack itself. It meant they had no idea what humanity would do next. Colonies on the frontier whispered in fear, their leaders ordering defenses built overnight. Traders abandoned routes that passed near the silent system, refusing to risk the howl of warships in the dark. And in hidden corners of the galaxy, old veterans who had once fought against humans sat in silence, their eyes hollow, their hands trembling as they whispered the truth to anyone who would listen. This is not their war. This is their return. Back on the ruined world, the survivors tried to live, but every moment was filled with tension. The warship remained, its shadow crawling over their cities as it drifted silently above. It did not fire again, it did not move closer, it did not speak. But its presence was enough to break their spirits. The colony's leaders gathered once more in the shattered hall, their faces pale, their voices weak. They debated what to do. Should they send a message, try to speak to it, beg for mercy? Or should they stay silent, hoping the predator above would ignore them? No one agreed. But none were brave enough to act. Fear chained them to stillness. The warship howled once more that night, shorter than before but sharper, like the low growl of a beast warning prey not to move. The sound rippled through the ruins, shaking every building, making even the strongest soldiers fall to their knees. It was not a signal to attack, but it was not peace either. It was dominance. A reminder that the humans were in control, and the colony's fate was no longer its own. The silence that followed was unbearable. It crawled into the hearts of the survivors, filling their dreams, twisting their thoughts. Even children stopped crying, their fear so deep it silenced them. Days passed this way, with the warship watching, the colony trembling, and the galaxy listening. The silence was no longer emptiness, it was a message. Humanity had returned, and they had nothing more to prove. The first strike had shattered the galaxy's illusion of safety. The silence after had shattered its hope. And in that silence, one truth grew louder than any howl. Humanity was not here to ask. Humanity was here to decide. The 31st day dawned under the shadow of the warship, and by now the survivors of the colony no longer asked if rescue was coming. They no longer whispered about the council, or about whether the massive vessel above them was friend or foe. They knew. The warship's silence had spoken louder than words, and the howl had carved itself into their bones. They lived now in a kind of suspended terror, every movement careful, every word whispered, as if making too much noise would draw the gaze of the monster in the sky. But as the sun rose, the silence broke. A sound cut across every channel, every comm, every broken screen in the colony. It was not static, not a howl, but a voice. Deep, heavy, carrying weight like stone. The translators trembled as they tried to shape it into words, stuttering, breaking, until finally it came through in every tongue at once. We are back. The survivors froze where they stood, their hearts hammering. Some fell to their knees, others cried out in disbelief, but all of them understood. The warship had spoken, and its words were not a promise of safety. They were a warning, a declaration, an announcement to the galaxy itself. Humanity, the Deathworlders, the forgotten predators of the stars, had returned. Above, the warship stirred. More lights ignited across its scarred hull, weapons humming faintly with power, engines burning brighter. And then, from behind it, the void tore open. One by one, more ships emerged from the darkness, their silhouettes jagged and brutal like the first. Dozens, then hundreds, filling the horizon, blotting out the stars. The colony gasped in unison, their voices breaking as they realized this was not an accident, not a lone survivor ship drifting through the void. This was a fleet. A fleet that had waited, hidden, and now arrived to show the galaxy that humanity was not only alive but stronger than before. Each warship bore scars of ancient battles, their hulls patched with alien steel, their banners crude but burning with a symbol none could mistake, the mark of Earth. The howl came again, not from one ship but from all of them together, a chorus of thunder that shook the very air, rattling mountains, cracking stone, making oceans ripple with its force. The survivors clutched each other, their fear so deep it bordered on reverence. They were no longer looking at myths or shadows. They were looking at Deathworlders, and Deathworlders had returned in force. Across the galaxy, the signal spread like wildfire. Council chambers erupted in chaos, generals shouted for fleets, civilians wept in fear, and whispers spread in every corner of space. The word human was no longer a rumor. It was no longer a ghost from the past. It was a reality, alive and roaring. On distant worlds, elders who had fought in the ancient wars collapsed in grief, muttering that the galaxy's worst nightmare had come true. On frontier colonies, leaders prepared for evacuation, believing the storm would reach them next. And on the colony below the fleet, the survivors stared upward in silence, knowing their fate was no longer their own. The human fleet drifted above them like gods of war, silent after their howl, watching, waiting. Then the voice came again, cold and final, carried across every frequency in the galaxy. The Deathworlders have returned. The words echoed like thunder, breaking the last illusions the galaxy had held. Humanity had not been erased. Humanity had not been destroyed. They had survived, grown, and now they had come back not as victims, not as refugees, but as conquerors. The return of the Deathworlders had begun, and the galaxy would never know silence again. The galaxy trembled not from earthquakes or storms, but from fear that rippled across every world, every fleet, every council chamber. The return of the Deathworlders had torn apart the illusion of peace, and now nothing could put it back together. In the shattered colony where it began, survivors knelt in the ruins, staring upward as the human fleet loomed above them, silent but alive, their engines glowing red like the eyes of predators who had found their prey. The war cry still echoed in their bones, and though no more words followed, none were needed. Humanity's presence was a declaration louder than any speech. The galaxy had once believed itself safe, united, untouchable under the watch of the Council. But the Council itself was now broken by panic. In the Grand Chamber, where order had ruled for centuries, delegates screamed over one another, their voices shaking, their translators struggling to keep up with the chaos. Some demanded a united war, the largest fleets in history launched to crush humanity once and for all. Others shouted that it was impossible, that if humanity had survived in silence for centuries, hidden and growing strong in the dark, then nothing could defeat them now. The High Speaker struck his staff for silence, but his crystal body dimmed with fear, his voice cracking as he admitted what none had dared to say aloud: "We never destroyed them. We only delayed them. And now they are here to collect the debt." The chamber erupted, not with arguments this time but with silence, because every delegate knew it was true. Across the frontier, outposts abandoned their stations, merchants turned their ships away from human-controlled space, smugglers refused to travel anywhere near the sector where the warship first howled. Civilizations that had once laughed at old myths now prayed that the storm would not reach them, but prayers did not stop predators. The humans had not returned as a rumor or a single ship, they had returned as a fleet, a force, a vengeance sharpened over centuries of exile. On hidden worlds. Veterans who had once fought against humans shook with despair. They remembered the battles, the relentless ferocity, the way humans refused to surrender even when outnumbered, even when facing annihilation. They had told their children those stories were exaggerations, shadows of the past. But now those same children stared at the skies in fear, realizing the stories were not lies but warnings. The galaxy's silence had been shattered, its order broken, its peace burned away by the howl of Terran engines. And still the humans had said little, done little, compared to what they could do. That was the most terrifying part. Their first strike was not conquest, it was a reminder. A test. A warning. And the galaxy had failed it. In the colony below, one survivor whispered the thought now echoing across the stars. They are not asking. They are not begging. They are here to take back what was theirs. The warships above shifted slowly, forming tighter lines, their banners faintly glowing in the dark. More ships emerged from the void, endless shapes that blotted out the horizon, their engines burning bright as if the stars themselves were bending to humanity's will. And in that moment, the galaxy understood the truth. Humanity was no longer gone. Humanity was no longer forgotten. They were Deathwelders, and they had returned with wrath carved into their very bones. The galaxy trembled because it knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning.